You should see the amount of DMs that I got over the last 2 days asking me to come back and just make one last video on DC Comics because I just won the war that I fought since 2009 on the Cosmic Armor Superman.
It's a fray!
Everybody on Comic Vine, everybody on Versus Battles, everybody on YouTube, everybody on TikTok who fought against me and the Cosmic Armor Talks are all debunked now. You lost the war, and I won. And I won with honesty, integrity, and making sure not to reinterpret and drag out the author's statements. I respected the lore, I respected the stories and the comics and the art. I didn't change anything. I might be the only person in the whole world to have read the Kabbalah, to have investigated Grant Morrison's talks and interviews, and also read the source material. I might be the only guy who has ever done that. I've been trying to tell people all of this was laid out in the Jewish Kabbalah, which is a religious Jewish denomination of Judaism. So all of it is there. All that mysticism stuff is there in the Final Crisis and Multiversity stories, and also in Grant's interviews. All you have to do is respect the content creator, and you don't end up looking like a complete moron. Okay? It was pretty much me versus thousands and thousands and thousands of other people who just refused to accept what the Cosmic Armor was. So Grant did a AMA yesterday and the day before on Reddit, and he answered a lot of questions about the Overvoid and the Cosmic Armor. So let's just read just a few of them. So this person asks Grant what he thinks about Superman and all those other things. Like, what does he think about the narrative of Superman? And Grant replies that the narrative of Superman is unbeatable. So that's really important. And then after that, a different guy asks some stuff about the Overvoid and why some other authors changed the ideas of the Final Crisis and Multiversity into their own stories. And Grant's like, well, my ideas were not changed at all. I was given a great deal of leeway. So again, when you read the Metal series, the first notion that you're going to get in your mind is, oh my god, they changed Final Crisis. But you didn't read all of the issues. You didn't read Justice League Odyssey. You didn't read Justice League versus the Legion of Doom. You didn't read Dark Crisis, the Dark Army, where all of these things were tied together, and the groundwork in Final Crisis sets up Metal and all the other ones. So the point of the new era of DC Comics was to phase out the Orrery of Worlds, which is the local 52 of the original continuity Prime multiverse. Just like how there's other variant universes in DC, and there's a Prime Earth Zero, that's the one where all the comic books usually take place in the main continuity. Well, they wanted to take that up and amp it up to multiverses. Now, the original Local 52, which is Final Crisis and before, were all the original 80-year history of the DCU, called the Local 52. It was located inside of a jar that the Overvoid put it in. We see that in Final Crisis. So this jar represents all of the old history, and inside of this jar were infinite multiverses. Then after the Final Crisis, during the times of the Multiversity in 2014, they were spat out, and only the Local 52 now is in that jar. So now infinite other multiverses exist outside of the jar. The reason for this was DC wants to phase out the Local 52 original continuity. They did it for 80 years. Let them retire. Let Superman and all those stories rest and be respected. They don't have to keep going back to those anymore. And everybody hates, including the authors who have repeatedly said they hate when they go back to these old stories and they change them and they're trying to do new things with them and altering the narrative. They don't have to do that anymore. Just like how there were Prime Earth Zero in the Orrery, and then alternate universes around there where some other comics take place, the Prime continuity of DC used to be this Earth Zero. Now that Prime continuity of DC, the legacy of 80 years of DC Comics, is now locked in a jar located within bleed space. And we see that in Dark Crisis, the Dark Army, where the Great Darkness is trying to invade the Orrery of Worlds and can't get in because it's not inside of the Orrery. It's outside of it. So in Justice League Odyssey, we learn that Darkseid wrote Perpetua and the story of Perpetua using the Hyper Adapter. And he forged his own creation. This became the new prime canon of DC Comics. It's no longer the old orrery of worlds. It's now the new prime cosmology, the perpetual multiverse. That's the brand new one. So everything outside of that is not the same as what is inside of it. All the characters, all the locations, all the stories, all the comics from the past 80 years of comic books for DC are in the orrery. They're locked forever. And Dr. Light and Dr. Multiverse are outside of this jar, the original orrery, trying to stop the Great Darkness army from getting inside of it. So the Great Darkness wasn't even inside of it. It was completely separate, and it was coming from the perpetual multiverse, which is separate from the original orrery. It's trying to get in, which shows you that it's not inside of it already. It's a separate place. There are other content creators who lied to you for many, 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 many years about this and refused to show any of these sources, any of these panels. They don't exist on their channels for a reason, because they don't want you to know that this is what DC Comics did. DC even told you, Josh Williamson even told you, that the greater omniverse, which is the area around the perpetual multiverse, was not the overvoid. That was a ploy. That was a false thing. It was actually the Crisis on Infinite Earths multiverse from the original story that was ejected out of the orrery of worlds and located around the perpetual multiverse. So that's the area Darkseid created his false creation in, which now is the brand new prime canon multiverse of DC Comics. Do you get it? That's what the whole point of Metal was, all the way to the end of Dark Crisis and the Absolute. So Darkseid tried to do this thing because he kept losing, and he has to make his own creation to sift power from it, okay? And then later in Absolute, we find out that Darkseid is the Great Darkness, which was said in the guidebooks, which nobody covered but me. There's nobody else on YouTube who covered any of this except me. I was right about all of this, and all I did was copy and paste the source material and the guides and the authors. So when Darkseid made this, it was his test phase. The perpetual multiverse was his test phase. He left it after Metal ended, okay? And then he made his Absolute Universe masterpiece. That was his new multiverse. That was his new thing. And he learned a lot of tricks by making the perpetual one. That was his test, the alpha, the beta stage. And then his masterpiece, his crescendo, was the Absolute, where he learned all of that stuff and blended a lot of the horrible things from the dark multiverse that worked with the light creation of the perpetual multiverse. And all of them combined were the stories for the Absolute multiverse. So he selected all the best parts of his original beta and used them in his new masterpiece. That's what the Absolute was. It was all the horrific stories that didn't work and were terrible and manifested in the Absolute Universe the same way they manifested in the Dark Multiverse, because the Dark Multiverse was phase 1. Phase 2, the final area of his plan, was the Absolute Universe. That's what DC is doing. They are phasing out the old 80-year history of the Prime multiverse. It's no longer the Prime, okay? So after Final Crisis and the Multiversity, they locked this, and everything after that was taking place in the new multiverse. So all of these characters, all these versions of Superman, all these other things, except Psycho Pirate. Psycho Pirate was the only one who was original from the original orrery. He's the only one that was selected and removed and placed, for some reason unknown, into the perpetual multiverse. And in Secret File 6, we find out that Psycho Pirate is uncovering that everything in his creation is false. And it's only a few months old. It's not billions of years old. It's not thousands, eons and eons and eons and gajillion billion years old. No, it's just a few months old. And he figures it out, and he pulls down the comic panels, leaves the perpetual multiverse, and finds Darkseid outside of it, who says that he has written this entire cosmology, which is then further explained a few years prior in Justice League Odyssey, where Darkseid pulls a comic panel, a literal flying comic panel with Perpetua's totality symbol on it. So he literally wrote a comic book panel with the story of Perpetua on it, and he's calling it Back Home. Now, mind you, at this time, the plot narrative of Justice League Odyssey that he's trying to hide from Perpetua and all this stuff. So why is he calling her creation even closer? It's because he wrote it and he's calling it home, and he's getting ready to forge his plan. And then later in this comic book, at the end of the series, they see that Darkseid just enacted his plan, and when the heroes try to teleport back home to their alternate universe, they find out that their original location for their home is now the dark multiverse. So the entire cosmology shifted. They tried the boom tube back to their home. It's no longer that variant Earth or that universe that they're from. It's now the dark multiverse. So the original location of their home universe is no longer their home universe. It's now the dark multiverse. It's brand new, which is why Epoch is a time traveler from the time stream outside of the Perpetua multiverse who randomly drops into the Perpetua multiverse and is like, who the hell is Perpetua? The Great Darkness? I've never heard of these things. I'm gonna just unmake them with time revision technology, which Darkseid then tries to steal later. So Epoch, a time traveler, has no clue who Perpetua is because she's the brand new historical account of this brand new multiverse revision that Darkseid made. All of the comics have already explained all this. It's all there. So the cosmic armor is not below Perpetua, is not below the presence. Grant even tells you that in these new interviews, which are just incredible. I absolutely love this. So this guy asks, hi Grant, in Final Crisis Superman Beyond, my favorite comic of all time, when Superman Thought Robot said he's inside of a self-assembling hyperstory, didn't he mean that he's fighting a story that writes itself to overcome Thought Robot? Can you elaborate more on this? The story writes itself to counter Superman's moves. It's a self-aware, weaponized narrative that attempts to outplot him. Every time Superman makes a move, the story adapts to block him. Who's the one controlling that story? It's the Overvoid. The Overvoid placed the Thought Robot and Mandrake into the ultimate hyperstory, and the cosmic armor was out haxing the Overvoid, trying to plot manip the cosmic armor into a loss, because the Overvoid doesn't want the cosmic armor to win. It wants everything back to non-existence. It thinks it's all a germ, and it wants it back to nothing. So the Overvoid is not on the cosmic armor's side. It's the one that threw them both into that fight and personified the cosmic armor that way. So another question was asked, and Grant replies, it's all based on misunderstanding of the concept of the Overvoid. The Overvoid includes the Great Darkness and everything else that has ever appeared on the comic page. The Great Darkness might be represented by the Flaw, which is the first spot of ink that causes the Overvoid to separate into subject and object. So, not only that, but Grant in the rest of this says that the presence and the Great Darkness are part of the Flaw and just emanations of the Void, whereas the entire summary of all of existence, which includes the presence and the Great Darkness and Lucifer and Perpetua and the Source and all of that other stuff, is all part of the armor. The armor is the entire sum of the Flaw embodied, and it all goes back to the Kabbalah. So in the Kabbalah, there's a thing called the Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof radiates infinite divine light out of existence, and the light rays penetrate the Overvoid, which in this is called the Ein. In that religion, it's called the Ein, okay? It's the void, it's the nothing aspect. The light rays of existence penetrate and eject out of existence into the void, okay? And those light rays are called the Kav, K-A-V, okay? The Kav. It's just a fun narrative swap, and it just so happens to fit with the cosmic Ein Sof, C-A-S. So the Ein Sof is the cosmic armor, C-A-S, cosmic Ein Sof. Another ploy on the word Kav, K-A-V. The word Kav in Hebrew translates to infinite hope. Okay, so the light rays coming out of all existence in the Kabbalah are the infinite hope and love factor of existence. It's unbeatable. The idea of Superman is unbeatable, which is what Grant tells you in these interviews. The Thought Robot is the most pure archetypal manifestation of Superman's mission, which is to protect the vulnerable from bullies and predators. But Thought Robot is an abstract form occupying a kind of platonic realm of ideas and forms. It's not physical, is what the author says. So all those people who use that nonsense galaxies, 10 billion galaxies or whatever, 10 billion suns, you guys just clearly are just trolling, and that's totally fine. But here, look, the point here is that the author explained all of this stuff. It is fantastic. This is the end of the war. I absolutely love it. More or less, the overvoid is the absolute ground of reality, which in this case of comic characters is the page they're drawn on as it exists embedded in a higher dimensional reality, our own. All the ideas like the presence, the source, etc. are increasingly condensed and contextualized expressions of the absolute. The overvoid's other name is the absolute void in the Kabbalah. So, everybody who said that the presence and the great darkness are above the cosmic armor, you were wrong. You were debunked. Thank you, Grant, for finally coming out and explaining all of this. I really, really appreciate it. All the other people on all those other forums who fought me for so long on this, and I'm just trying to educate people on what the Kabbalah said. I read the Kabbalah. I used to be a religious debater, so I have read the Kabbalah. It's a sad fact that very, very few people who debate Cosmic Armor Superman or anything DC have also read the Kabbalah and don't know any of that. Even in these interviews, somebody asks Grant why these other people and other authors have gone back to the biblical account of things and didn't stay with the Kabbalah version of it that Grant wrote. And he said it's just, they do whatever they want to do, or maybe they didn't read it or something like that. I can't remember what the exact quote was, but even Grant understands that the other authors didn't follow the Final Crisis version of this or the multiversity, even though they're the ground of being, probably because they didn't read the Kabbalah and don't know what the Kabbalah says about all this stuff. So again, the cosmic armor is all of existence combined into one visual, and the reason for that was the overvoid needed to personify and understand and cope with this idea that existence exists and what is its relationship with non-existence. So it embodies all of the flaw, those rays of light coming out of existence that are penetrating the overvoid. It's merging into the overvoid without the overvoid's permission, and it embodies those light rays as the infinite hope factor, which is what Superman's mission is all about. Superman embodies hope. So that's why the light rays, the divine light rays, which were shown in the illustration for the cosmic armor, were drawn as a big Superman. It's because the overvoid embodies ultimate hope, with the only visage of ultimate hope that exists down there, which is Superman.